Hey folks, welcome back to Integrative Psychonautics. Hope you're doing well out there. So today's video is going to be another one of these kind of from the heart, brain dump type videos that I've been doing lately. Again, kind of exploring some of the insights that popped up for me during this recent Christmas season and my visit to my folks and just some of the things I started to realize. Today's video in particular is going to be about the strangeness of our personal narrative. And in particular, the strangeness of simultaneity in time or in our personal narrative. This is just kind of a personal pondering, a personal exploration of something I find fascinating. You may or may not resonate with it. If you're looking for really clean, clear-cut information, a how-to, step-by-step kind of video, this is probably not going to be that kind of video, so you might want to click off. But for anyone else who wants to just kind of hear my thoughts about this, and the relevance of personal narrative to our healing process, join me. Let's talk about it. So, okay. Let me set a little context here, and then I'll kind of explain what I'm thinking about here. So, I went to go visit my folks for Christmas, like I said, and overall, wonderful to see them. I adore them. They are getting older and they're really precious to me. And every moment I get with them is really such a blessing and super special. And I'm an only child. So it was just them and me, essentially, right? And I go to visit them and they're kind of having a storage issue. And they're kind of like, coming across a bunch of old stuff, that they've saved and kind of moved all over the country for me. And so they're like, hey, we have a bunch of boxes here with a bunch of your old stuff from, your birth and your baby era and your toddlerhood and, grade school and high school. So you want to look through it, check it out and let us know if you want to keep it or not, what you want to do with it. So part of my experience this Christmas was opening up and looking at all these old photos and newspaper articles and blah, 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 blah from my life, right? And it was incredibly nostalgic, as you would expect, and incredibly heartwarming and connected me a lot to who I was and to the younger versions of me and my personal history and my personal narrative, which was incredibly beautiful. At the same time, I'm looking at these moments in my life, right? Which I have photos or video, or yearbooks or documentation of. And I'm looking at who I was and, what I looked like on the outside and, kind of whatever, artworks I created or things I wrote or what have you. And I'm looking at where I was at observably from the outside, right? Which was this really young, vulnerable, sweet, innocent little boy, right? And then I'm also remembering simultaneously on the inside the struggles, the conflicts, the more I've done my own therapeutic journey and healing journey here, starting to understand, the dynamics, the subtleties, the complexities of what I was dealing with, the pain points, the things that didn't get addressed that I was dealing with internally during some of these periods. And it was just really striking to me, the simultaneity of that, right? It's a bit of a cheesy cliche, but there's a saying that I've been kind of returning back to a lot and that I've been saying to others a lot and, using it with my coaching clients or saying to, friends of mine, which is that more than one thing can be true at the same time. Two or more things can be true at the same time. And I guess I'm just really kind of integrating what that means and really starting to wrap my head around, around that. And while that's incredibly obvious on one level, I think for a lot of us, we don't really tend to fully wrap our heads around that or use that as a working understanding of life, right? That there are so many things that can be simultaneously true all at the same time. And, when we're going back and we're looking at our personal history and we're looking at our narrative of our life experience, we're looking at who we were and our sense of self along the way. And, it can be a little confusing, especially if you're on this therapeutic journey where you're kind of really looking at what your wounds were, what the problems were, what the struggles were, what the missing things in our lives were, what the things that were present in our lives that weren't quite right for us were, right? There can be a lot there to kind of come to terms with and understand. And implicitly in that, there's a focus on the painful, on the negative, on the dysfunctional, on the misaligned, et cetera, right? And it's easy for us when we're looking at that stuff to kind of ignore or filter out or not also simultaneously recognize all that may have been beautiful or right or good or happy or healthy or connective, et cetera, right? And so there's this really funny juxtaposition that can be a part of our personal narrative, right? And for me, this just really came home, and it's such a strange, mysterious, striking thing about being a human being, right? Like in a given moment in our lives, we're often kind of singularly focused. We have whatever the one thing is that we're kind of putting most of our attention on, even though, throughout the course of a day, obviously, we move our attention across all kinds of different domains or areas or places, different aspects of our life. And over the course of, say, a season, a few months, or, half a year or a year, there will be all kinds of different layers of experience happening simultaneously, right? And I don't know, there's just something very deep and complex and mysterious about that, but that is closer to the reality of what life really is, if you think about it, right? Another example of this that always just boggles my mind is the simultaneity of certain pieces of history. So, I'm not a big history nerd, but it's certainly fascinating to me, especially the older I've gotten, the more I've really been fascinated at different, schools of thought or, social movements or creative movements, artistic movements, or et cetera. Like it's interesting, right? How do the things that emerge in our world emerge, and where they come from, and what's the arc of that? And, this is also similarly true, like the weird simultaneity of different social movements, or things happening in the world at the same time that seem massively disparate or different, that you may not associate as being part of the same era, but actually are, right? Maybe like a really rough, cheap example of this that I could think of is you can kind of think of like somewhere in the mid 1960s in the US here, that kind of quaint 1950s, horn rim glasses, everyone dressing really nicely and being fairly socially conservative kind of thing, being fairly academic or what have you. That was happening simultaneously with, the burgeoning kind of hippie beat, wild early psychedelic movement and all the rock and roll stuff that kind of came with that. And, that's before my time. I wasn't alive then, obviously. But to me, that's a striking thing that both of those were happening socially at the same time, just in one country, let alone where other countries were in their, industrialization and development process, in other parts of the world during the mid 60s. Like there's really a diversity of types of human experience, flavors of human experience happening simultaneously. And this has always been true, right? And there's something about that I think is really easy in hindsight to kind of gloss over and kind of compartmentalize and kind of fragment into these, because these different areas of life may feel so significantly distinct in quality, in aesthetic, in meaning, in level of consciousness, right? It's easy for us to compartmentalize them and be like, oh, well, that was that period and that was what was happening, not really recognizing the full scope, the full width, the full complexity of things that are simultaneously happening. I think this is one of these things that psychedelics can really start to reveal to you, right? I can't count the number of times I've really registered I'm there on a psychedelic, I'm having a good time, and it just starts to really dawn on me the multiplicity of the insane, wild, suffering that's happening on our planet, and some of the horrors that human beings are still going through simultaneously, while there's also exquisite beauty and, the most lush, amazingly vibrant, beautiful living places, and, pockets of profound wisdom and profound peace and profound goodness, and, safety, all happening at the same time. That that our world is, even the geology of our world is constantly shape-shifting and changing, and and we're just living on it while it's moving. I mean, you really start to get a sense of these things, these larger arcs of processes, or the simultaneity of like profound suffering and profound beauty, that really is definitive of life. And so that's kind of the transmission here. There's not a real clear-cut point, except to say that this is how it is. And when we get to like really get a clear shot of that, from my point of view, that's a really mysterious, strange, kind of beautiful thing to really start to wrap our heads around. And I guess if I want to kind of like, frame this into a bit of a personal development, therapeutic kind of approach to things, maybe I would say, think about this when you're doing your work around your own personal narrative. I'm of mixed mind, I'll be honest here, when it comes to excavating personal narratives and understanding personal narratives. I think people overemphasize it in their healing journey and place too much importance on it and get hung up on it. And I think there's a bit of a therapy cliche there with doing that. But the other side of the coin there is that it's clearly we are creatures that live inside of a sense of narrative. We like to construct a sense of narrative, and it's at some level probably a human need and incredibly important. And so I have respect for it. I have sensitivity to it. I do it myself, but I also think we shouldn't always grasp for a narrative, because sometimes we just don't have the data. And that doesn't have to stop us from growing or from healing or from integrating or from, kind of inferring and kind of creating completion that way. Right. So, just consider that when you're going back and you're doing your narrative work here, while there may be, these things you're focused on and your attention is really on the pain or on the negatives or on the dysfunction or on the XYZ that was, not right, that damaged you or hurt you in some way, that also there may have been profound experiences of beauty, saving graces, so much goodness also happening at the exact same time. So I guess I'm going to wrap it there. Thanks for listening. If you joined me on this brain dump, I really appreciate it. I have no idea how these videos land for you guys, but I feel like part of my presence here on the channel and part of my, work as a coach isn't just to like present this like hyper professional image, not that that's really, my orientation anyways, or that it's all about just this like linear, logical, like information dense kind of stuff, but it's also about relating to his people, giving you a little bit of a sense of me, giving you a little bit of a sense of some of the things I'm exploring. And, I think, from my point of view, to be frank, I've had the good fortune to be in community with a lot of other like spiritual seekers, people on the self-healing path, people in therapy, people who are healers or therapists themselves. It's one of the big benefits of my time living in Northern California. And, from that, one of the things I took away is that some of the most profound things I learned were just emerged in conversation with other deep thinkers and people on the path who are exploring ideas themselves. And together, as we kind of like just riffed on stuff similar to what I'm doing here with you, there are some really amazing pieces of wisdom and insight that I'd not read or heard anywhere else that would pop out. So I guess that's one of my intentions here. Anyways, much love to you all. I hope you're doing well out there, and I hope this is useful. And I think this is probably the last of the insight videos about Christmas. So if you're tired of hearing this kind of stuff, this will probably be it. So anyways, much love, more content on the way soon. Take care.